Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm very happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is Madison Callahan, who is one of the founders and organizers of Iboga Healing, which originally operated out of Costa Rica and currently operates out of Portugal. And Madison also offers her own integration services at rootsintegration.com. We spoke the other month about being an expat and leaving the United States and serving medicine in Costa Rica and moving her family to Portugal, her relationship with Iboga, her time with the Bawiti, her work as an integration coach, just a wide-ranging conversation, and really looking forward to bringing that to you today here on the podcast. Just a couple quick announcements before we get into the conversation with Madison. There have not been any contributions in support of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast over the past couple of weeks now, so just want to put it out there that if you'd like to support this podcast, if you appreciate the information that you get here and the entertainment and all the rest, well, you can stop by my personal webpage at martinball.net and use the PayPal link at the top right of the page or link on over from there to my Patreon page at patreon.com/martinwball. You can sign up for the monthly level that best suits you, anywhere from $1 a month up to $100 a month, with increasing access and benefits and gifts all along the way. And just a reminder for anybody who signs up for $20 a month or above, you get access to the full Entheogenic Evolution archive of episodes that are no longer active here on the podcast, but are exclusively available for my Patreon supporters over at Patreon. My only other announcement for this week is that I have finally gotten around to actually creating a playlist on Spotify. I'm not really a Spotify user. My music has been on Spotify for a number of years, but I don't personally use Spotify to listen to music and have never bothered to put together a playlist before. But in the course that I'm helping to teach with the Mindscape Institute on facilitating 5-MeO-DMT, some of the students were asking about a playlist for sessions and for serving medicine. And I thought, well, maybe it's about time I put together a playlist of my own. So if you use Spotify and would like to check it out, my music page is just Martin Ball, and the playlist is the Psychedelic Session Playlist by Me, by Martin Ball. And it's around 6 hours long. It kind of pulses and waves through ambient soundscapes and then into more electronic world fusion and then a little more soundscapes and nature sounds and then into some percussive stuff with flutes and didgeridoo and throat and overtone singing and then some more ambient stuff and then just kind of keeps going for a good 5.5, 6 hours, something like that. So, it'll take you where you need to go. And I'm happy to offer that for anybody who'd like to check it out. It's all instrumental music. There's no lyrics. There's no association with any particular religious or spiritual tradition or identity within it. So I do like to say it's very neutral in that regard, which I personally think is important for working with psychedelics, to not have anything that's too loaded with any particular cultural or spiritual or religious identity. And it's all original music, and I invite you to check it out. I posted the playlist at my Patreon page and also at my webpage at martinball.net. And, of course, here's my weekly reminder that I'm available for 30, 60, and 90-minute video call consultations to help you integrate your entheogenic experience, specializing in, but not limited to, 5-MeO-DMT. You can check out nondualentheogenicintegration.com if you want more information, or just shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com, and we will find a time where we can get together and have a talk. And it's really a job that I love. I love getting to talk to people from all different walks of life, from all around the world, all different levels of experience. It's always fascinating, and really, my consultations are just highlights of my week. I really enjoy it quite a bit. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into our interview for today. Madison Callahan from Iboga Healing. If you'd like to check her out online, you can go to iboga-healing.com. Don't forget the dash. And then her personal webpage for integration is rootsintegration.com. And you can learn all about Iboga Healing in Portugal, all about her integration services. I would like to note that there does seem to be some kind of corruption that happened at the very end of the audio file. So the last couple minutes of our conversation have been cut off. So you don't get to hear our thank yous and farewells to each other. But it's going to end a little bit abruptly. Just want you to know. But once again, you can find Madison online at iboga-healing.com and rootsintegration.com. Here's our conversation. Okay, well, I'm welcoming on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today, Madison Callahan. Yeah, it's great to have you here, Madison.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. So are we connecting from Portugal? Is that where you are right now physically?
Yeah, I'm here in Sintra, Portugal. So we're several hours ahead of you, I believe.
Yeah, at least a few. Yeah, on the west coast of the United States. Probably you're 8 hours ahead, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making time out of your evening to come and speak with me. So today we have a variety of topics I would like to talk to you about. First off, like I usually do with guests that I don't know, is I like to have a little get to know you section of our interview and kind of find out how you got into psychedelic medicines and all of that kind of stuff. And we're going to be talking about Iboga healing. And for anybody who's interested in the website, it's iboga-healing.com. And this is the Iboga Center that you work at in Portugal. And from your biography, I understand that you previously worked in Costa Rica. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that as well. And then I'm also very interested to talk to you about the integration part of your offerings. And you also have your own separate website for Roots Integration. And very, very curious to talk to you about what integration means to you, but specifically in the context of Iboga. Because like on your website, something I've been saying a lot recently is, well, everybody talks about integration, but there's so many different ideas of what that means. And I offer integration specializing in 5-MeO-DMT. And part of my argument there is like, if you don't really know 5-MeO-DMT and how it works, you're not really going to be able to help someone integrate it because it's so different. And Iboga is also a very unique psychedelic. And
yes, it is.
Yeah, so I'm curious to talk to you about all of these things. And of course, also Bawiti tradition and how that's part of the program. So we have a lot of topics today.
Yeah, great. Yes, I love all of those topics, definitely.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and then start with you and how you got involved in this world of psychedelic plant medicine, and in particular, Iboga.
Yeah, great. So I found Iboga about 12 years ago. I was already, on a spiritual path, studying different indigenous traditions. So I had studied with Martín Prechtel, who's from the Mayan indigenous tradition, Malidoma Somé from an African indigenous tradition. So I would say my path to Iboga came more from like indigenous studies than necessarily like a psychedelic path. And then Iboga came into our lives and we really discovered what an amazing healing tool it is. At that time, I was beginning my own family. So there was definitely a desire to heal from those traumas from my own childhood, from the conditioning and the things that I had been through that I did not necessarily want to bring into the new family that I was creating. So, we experienced the Iboga with our teacher, Mugenda, who's a 10th generation Bwiti shaman from Gabon, Africa. At that time, he was offering retreats in Costa Rica. And it was an amazing and profound experience. Iboga as a mother has definitely taught me so much about how to tap into my patience, how to tap into my strength, how to get to know myself better so that I can, show up for all the people in my life in a better way. And then it became clear that this is the medicine that, we wanted to stay close to and that we wanted to work with. So then we began training with our teacher there in Costa Rica. We moved our family down there to train and study, and studied and trained for about 2 years before opening our own center, Iboga Healing Costa Rica, which was a beautiful project for sure. We were there for about 5 years doing that. We've moved around a little bit since then, but we're definitely firmly grounded here in Portugal now. And as you saw from my bio, I've really kind of taken a step back from ceremony to be with the children and also to focus on integration, which, as you said, is such an important part of the whole experience. And I think something that's really worthy of developing further. So that's really what I'm working on now. But we are still currently hosting retreats, usually like 2 retreats a month here in Portugal that we can chat about as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to, but if you are open to it, I'm kind of curious that some of the things that you mentioned that you got out of your Iboga experience, you said like patience, ability to show up, to release trauma from your own childhood and not bring that into your new life as a mother. I'm just curious if there's anything that you might be open to sharing at the personal level of how that worked for you. And the reason that I ask is that, it's always good to ask people about their own actual experience, because we can talk in generalities like, it helped me be more patient. But it's kind of curious, like, what are the specifics of that for you? And how did that come out of your own experiences with Iboga?
Yeah, definitely. So over the last decade, I've had 6 full journeys with Iboga. I think that really speaks for the medicine in the sense that it's not something that you need to do a lot of times. It's something that's really lasting. The effects really stick, and 2 journeys in 1 week can give you enough to go on, sometimes for years. So, a way to kind of explain how it's been for me, each journey has been really different and brought me different teachings and different wisdom, definitely. But in those original journeys I had with Iboga, I was a mother of 2 small children, and I was just exhausted. My adrenals were really taxed. I was really trying to be an entire village, for my children and for my family, which is difficult for all mothers in this world, for sure. And one of the things that really was profound for me during my first Iboga journey was, the next day after my night in the temple, I was laying in my bed during rest and integration day, which is a really special time to just process your experience and kind of be present with your senses. And I could just hear all the sounds around me so clearly and pristinely. Like my sense of hearing had just really opened up during my Iboga journey. And what I realized when I was laying there is that previous to that journey, every time I would hear a sound, I was immediately responding, within seconds, with fear. It was like, did someone bump their head? Is everyone okay? Is something wrong? Almost every single sound I was hearing in my day, my immediate response was fear. And it was like this cycle that was leading me to this adrenal taxation that I just couldn't escape. So during this journey and on that next day, the download that really came to me was like, okay, hearing the sound, the stimulus, and then giving a space for deciding how you should respond. Which sounds really simple, but if you can actually filter the information coming in and then, react accordingly and react calmly or appropriately, you can save yourself so much stress and so much of those, stress hormones. So that's just one tiny example of something that I experienced during one of my journeys that has really helped me just to slow down in my day to day and not having so much fear coursing through my body all the time. Yeah.
I really love that example because for one, it's really, really mundane. And, often when we're dealing with psychedelics, people are talking about, all the big, grand, cosmic, whatever it is that's going on. But this is something that's really mundane. And what I love that it shows is that essentially you had an unconscious program that was running all the time. Wasn't your choice to have that program, because it was just built in. So there's an automatic response, which was getting in the way of you just being able to absorb whatever is happening presently within reality, because there's always this, it's almost like mom overload. It's like, what? Is something wrong? Is somebody hurt? Do I need to do something about it? So that stimulus is driving you into kind of almost a compulsive action. And
Yeah.
it's not serving you as an
Yeah.
individual. It's not serving you as a mom, and it's actually running you down. And that's the kind of thing where if somebody were to point that out to you, you might just say, well, yeah, but what can I do about it? But here it
Yeah.
actually gave you the space to experience something different. And that's where I see so much of the transformative power of psychedelic work, is that it gives you the experience. So now you can know, wow, I can just listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I can take my moment to respond. And that's one of my favorite things about Iboga, is that while it is cosmic and it is a deep dive and it's definitely a big journey, it has a really grounding element about it that always brings it home to something that is pertaining to your day-to-day life, which I think is really needed in the world right now. Like, okay, I had this visionary experience, but there was these pinpoints that helped me loop it back to my day-to-day and how I can make changes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you were introduced to this in Costa Rica, is this where you started with your own psychedelic experience?
I had already tried, psilocybin, LSD. Let's see, I had already tried San Pedro, but more in like smaller doses and lighter ways and a little bit of more recreational ways. I would definitely say Iboga was my first big journey of this kind, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a big one to go for.
Yeah.
Was there, so you've kind of mentioned what the motivation was, but was there anything in particular that really made you feel like, yeah, I want to go deep into this one. This sounds like it's right for me.
Yeah, I think just the authenticity of it, as you mentioned, the Bwiti tradition, it's a tradition that has a lot of foundational and fundamental like tools for just living a happy life. It's not a religion. It doesn't require you to change who you are to kind of understand it. It's really based on a set of principles that even a child could understand, like things that just ring true. And I think when you're sitting there by the fire and you're eating the medicine and you're listening to those principles, the truth of it just feels right, or it did for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear more about that. And I love this idea that it's very grounded in practical living. And I think that that's important within the psychedelic space because, let's be honest, a lot of people kind of drift off into, I just want to spend all my time in the astral and I want to communicate with aliens and, I want to have these deep experiences, but it becomes detached from the lived experience of just being a human being and like,
Yeah.
let's just try and do better and, be here. So I'd be very interested to hear what some of these aspects of the Bwiti tradition are that were communicated to you through these trainings that you were going through and how that applies to day-to-day living.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely agree. I think that all of the different psychedelics and plant medicines have their own set of wisdom to offer that is so special and transformative. And Iboga, being a root, it's very true to form. It's very much about what is at the very bottom of what's going on for me. What is that seed, that started when I was born, maybe, or maybe even before, of who I am, and how can I really make sure things are growing from the right place, and coming from this place. So when you're working with the Bwiti tradition and Iboga, I would say, to just summarize, the goal of the Iboga experience would be to reconnect to your soul. For the Bwiti, they say that when we're born, we're given 3 gifts. We're given our mind, our body, and our soul. So these are the things that we have. A big part of the Iboga journey is kind of putting your soul back into the driver's seat. A lot of times in the Western world, our mind is in the driver's seat. Our mind is driving. But our teacher says that actually the mind is the motor of the car. The soul is what's supposed to be in the driver's seat. That's your true GPS, so you know which direction you're going. So a lot of this experience is about kind of quieting that voice of the mind so that you can really hear the soul louder and really connect to them. In the Western world, we have a lot of people talking about dissociation or depersonalization, when traumatic events happen. And from the Bwiti perspective, the way that we see it is that when a traumatic event happens, your soul retreats. The soul has a gentleness about it. When something really harsh or intense happens, it kind of takes a step back. And during the Iboga journey, you get a chance to re-merge with yourself in a way that's going to allow you to be more present in your life, using all your senses, and being in the present moment rather than being kind of fragmented or separated from yourself. And that truth really becomes apparent when you have that medicine in your body of just like, oh, me, which is really tied to like having gratitude for your life, which some of us have been through a lot, and it's difficult to feel that gratitude, or we don't know what that really means. Maybe we say that, let's have gratitude, but we're not really feeling it, like feeling grateful for the gift of life. So with Iboga, we're able to have that experience of like, okay, I'm extremely grateful to have this gift and to make sure that I make each day count, because we don't know tomorrow, and we don't want to live in the past. So really being present each day and making sure that we're watching the way we're moving through the world, is such a gift that I've learned from this tradition, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to go to Gabon and spend time there, or has it mostly been through the work that you did in Costa Rica?
Yeah, so I spent about a decade pregnant, so I haven't actually gone to Gabon, but all of my colleagues have. Everyone else on our team has been initiated in the village there. So definitely that initiation and that rites of passage is like a big step in becoming an Iboga provider. I had the blessing of spending a lot of time with Mugenda in Costa Rica, so that was kind of my time to learn about it, but remaining closely tied to the village is super important to us. Going back there, getting extended education, also sourcing all of our medicine there from our sister village in a sustainable way, knowing that it's being grown and harvested ceremonially, knowing that the proceeds are going back to the village, is super important for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about that last bit for a moment, because I'm just curious, what are the requirements for sustainable harvesting of Iboga? I'm really unfamiliar with how long does it take the plant to grow? When is it ready for harvesting? How much work is involved in that? So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that to make sure that people understand kind of what's required in order to have that ethical sourcing of the medicine.
For sure. Yeah. So Iboga is an extremely abundant plant. It grows all over Gabon, Cameroon, and the Congo. So it's kind of all over those areas. The way that they plant it is actually just by picking the fruit off the bush and kind of throwing it out into the forest. It's not really labor intensive. It grows very naturally. It grows in like a swampy environment. It does take a few years for the roots to become, harvestable and usable. And some of the trees are super old, like 30 years old, that you're taking some selective roots and allowing the tree to still grow. And, as far as our teacher's concerned, Iboga is extremely abundant. It's just more about having a respect for the plant, of course, especially when you're harvesting it, when you're handling it, when you're dealing with it. They're always doing it ceremonially. So they're always singing, praying, connecting, dressed up, fully honoring that moment of even taking it out of the ground, which is so important, and keeping it in a good way and making sure that they have all of their ceremonial elements in place as they're bringing the Iboga out of the jungle, and stuff like that. I know that there's more and more kind of Iboga suppliers online popping up, and who knows kind of how they're doing it, what the energy that they're having is when they're harvesting it, where the proceeds are going, we're not really sure. So having that organic direct link to the Iboga that we know is being harvested in a good way is super important. And it's also important to note there's like two schools of Iboga. There's what I'm talking about, which is using whole Iboga root bark in a ceremonial traditional setting, usually with mental illness like depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder. Also some physical things like traumatic brain injury, nervous system disorders like Parkinson's disease and MS and things like that we work with. And then there's Ibogaine. Ibogaine is a pharmaceutical derivative of Iboga. So it's made in a lab. They're just isolating one of the 13 alkaloids that Iboga has. And it's the alkaloid that specifically affects the same receptors in the brain as addiction. So it's usually used in a clinical setting with like doctors and nurses for people who are having heavy addiction, like to opioids or amphetamines or something like that, which is wonderful. But they're like two kind of different schools of Iboga use. So I think for Ibogaine, the sourcing and the whole process is going to be quite different than with whole Iboga root bark. Yeah.
Yeah. And when it comes to Bwiti tradition and culture, it sounds like it's still very active within their culture, that this is still something that they're doing for themselves as well as bringing it out into the rest of the world. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so, Iboga was kept a secret by the Bwiti until I think it was a year during the 1960s. And actually, the Iboga told the Bwiti people themselves that it was time. It was time to share it with the world. The world really needed this tradition and this medicine. And from then on, they've been extremely open with sharing it. They really want people to learn about it, to take pictures, to create centers, to share it. So it feels like a really heartfelt message that they received. But they're definitely still thriving, intact, beautiful culture. Gabon is like 70% preserved natural rainforest. So I think that's really helped them maintain a lot of their like original ways as a people. I mean, they're definitely modernizing. They go to the city, they have phones, they wear normal clothes, but definitely the ritual aspect and the Iboga ceremony remains extremely strong there. Gabon considers Iboga its national treasure. So it's definitely recognized there. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people within that culture, at what point do they go through an initiation? Is there a particular age that people are brought into it?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the person. I mean, definitely initiation is a huge part of all indigenous cultures, right? They always have this rites of passage moment when they're coming into manhood or womanhood. So I think definitely maybe around 13 to 16 or something like that, which is really, I think, what a lot of our youth are seeking when they're trying drugs or they're doing alcohol. They're wanting to test their limits and know more about themselves and just aren't really given like a safe forum to do that. So during, coming of age, they have an initiation in the village and then also throughout life, which they call the rites of passage. So maybe after you've gotten married or after you've had a child or when you're going through a big change or maybe someone close to you has passed away and you're processing that grief, you can have these healing Iboga experiences to just like mark the passage of time and make sure that you're really staying close to yourself, throughout your life. But it's definitely an initiatory experience, no matter how you do it, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of kids, you've mentioned a few times that you're a mom, and just something that popped into my mind was I'm curious about how you relate all of this, your works, your passion, your interests. How do you relate that to your kids? Some people who work in this area, they hide it from their kids, or or they use euphemisms for what it is that they do, and then other people are very open. I'm just curious how, as a mother in the modern world, how do you balance that? Or even, are your kids old enough to start asking you questions about it yet? Or kind of what's your philosophy on that?
For sure. I love this question because I think that, first of all, the mental health of our mothers in our society is so important. And yet it's extremely taboo for us to like seek help in these ways, in these alternative ways, because we're the mother and we need to like stay straight, right? But for us, we've always been extremely open with our children. They've seen a lot of people come and go from the retreats. I don't keep them at retreat because I think it's a big energy, and people are sometimes going through a lot. So I want to kind of protect them from that in a certain way. But they've definitely seen a lot of people's before and afters, which is always beautiful. They've been to a lot of fires with just us or with just our crew or our family. And we talk about the tradition openly with them. Like I said, the Bwiti tradition is something that, even a child can understand. So I think it has infinitely blessed their life to be exposed to healing, and natural healing using plants and doing things that are really helpful to people, and I think for them it's kind of normal because they've kind of been born into it. I know that not everyone has that privilege of just being so open with their kids, but also, these plant medicines are becoming more accepted in our society and more recognized as tools that can really help. So they're starting to hear it from other places. My oldest child is 16. So I also am excited for him that when he does feel ready for like an initiatory experience, or he is testing his limits, or maybe going through something, that I have this tool, to offer him and to offer to the children as they get older. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah.
It brings another question to mind, and I'll preface it with a different context. So just thinking about parents, and particularly parents with younger kids. So, for example, I have an email exchange that I'm engaging in right now with this woman in France, and we're doing it via email because she's having somebody translate into English, and English is not her language, but she came to me saying that she had a very challenging 5-MeO DMT experience because in the first few moments as the experience is opening up, her first thought was, oh no, I'm never going to see my 1-year-old and my 2-year-old again. Right. So with 5-MeO DMT, there's sort of this initial sense of dissolution, which in the moment, it really presents as I'm never coming back from this. So it can be a big hurdle for parents of how do I go through this experience? And in the moment, hopefully lovingly, compassionately let go of my children with even accepting I'm never going to see them again. I'm never going to hug them again. This is it. And so that responsibility of parenthood is a factor that plays into a lot of people's experiences in that moment with 5-MeO. So I'm curious, when it comes to working with Iboga, is there anything similar? Have you seen that with parents in any way, or is it working in such a different way that it's not so much a hurdle for people? I'm just curious what you would say about that.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I mean, as parents, we're really tethered. We're extremely grounded and present, and taking that step outside of ourselves also means stepping outside of that role of the caregiver, which can be like really hard and scary to relinquish. I would say that with Iboga, because it has a very grounding nature, I'm always speaking about what a great medicine it is for parents, because like we said earlier, it's not really like removing you from your timeline. It's kind of like pushing you farther into your timeline. I think going the other direction in a way that's really helpful for parents, because, okay, you're going to think about your children during your journey, and probably you will cry, and you probably will feel an extreme amount of love for them, and you might miss them and stuff or worry about them, but you're going to be receiving information about how you were parented and how that's playing into, how you're choosing to parent your children and what's maybe working or not working for them. I mean, just to share a personal experience on that note, one of the most profound things I've gotten from Iboga myself is that, all the time we're teaching our children about taking care of themselves, loving themselves, what it looks like to pray or to connect or to spend time in nature. But the thing that Iboga really wanted to show me was that the best thing I can do for my kids is to allow them to see me loving myself.
Yeah.
And when they watch me loving myself, that's the ultimate blueprint for how they're going to treat themselves as they get older. It's not how I treat them. I can make their plates of dinner just perfect the way they like it with all the right things on it and make sure it's all nice. But if I'm just eating over the sink in the kitchen, eating leftovers, I'm not really teaching them very much about what it means to love yourself and to prioritize yourself as a person, as an adult, So that was a huge teaching that I got from Iboga that was directly related to like being a great parent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's great because it's putting that emphasis, kind of going back to what you were saying before, of it's putting you into you and helping you be a better person for you, which then translates into being a better person for your kids, for your relationships, for society. And I love what you just said about how it's really that grounding element is just another example. I was teaching in a class on Sunday about 5-MeO DMT facilitation, and somebody asked, like, well, how does ibogaine and Iboga, how does Iboga fit into what we're talking about with 5-MeO? And I said, well, actually, they're kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum. And that's a good thing, that 5-MeO is actually taking you into this transcendent experience beyond subject and object, where you enter into a non-dual state where everything is in a state of oneness. Whereas my impression of Iboga is that it's actually thoroughly putting you into all these different contexts of the choices and events of your life. So it's very personal in that sense. Whereas, again, 5-MeO is very transcendent. It's very non-personal at that deepest level. And that there's room for both of these kinds of events, and that you get different forms of healing from that, different forms of self-knowledge. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
So since we're talking about it, I'd like to invite you to describe as best you can kind of what is the trajectory of an Iboga experience. And, you know, I've had other Iboga facilitators on the show, but it's been a while. So let's just go with the assumption that most likely my audience has heard of Iboga. They know what it is, but they might not really know what are the specifics of when you actually take it. What does that entail? And then what kinds of experiences, we've already hinted at this a little bit, but it might even be confusing to hear about, well, you know, I thought about myself eating over the kitchen sink and how I neglected myself when my kids were eating something at the table. That might not, like, if people are thinking, oh, psychedelic experience, like, how does that fit? Like, so I was wondering if we could kind of unpack the phenomenology of the Iboga experience and how it starts, where it goes, and then even you already mentioned the day of rest and integration afterwards. I think that's certainly a big one with Iboga, that it's a big time commitment. So tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, to start, I would say that our retreats are always 8 days long. We've been doing it that way for over a decade. That's how we were taught to do it, and we haven't, you know, changed it. Our teacher always said, you know, I'm going to teach you this formula, and, you know, don't add anything and don't take anything away. And we've really stayed true to that. The 8 days is extremely important. You know, some people only have 3 days, and it's like, okay, well, you're going to have to wait till you have 8, because it's important to really take the time with this medicine. During those 8 days, we do 2 ceremonies. So, you know, giving time, ample time to arrive, time to have your first ceremony, time to rest in between, have your next one, and doing 2 is really important. I'll talk about why in a minute. And then time to rest from that before heading home. So that format is super successful, and that's how we always do it. As far as the ceremony itself, so day 1 of the 8-day retreat, that's just arrival day. That's just everyone's day to get here, meet us, meet the other guests, settle in, get a good night's sleep in their room, eat some food, you know, get grounded. On day 2, then you'll have a one-on-one with your provider just to talk more about you, your life, your goals and intentions for the ceremony, why you came, you know, to get to know each other better. There's a written exercise that we do on that day in preparation for the ceremony as well. And then when the sun goes down on day 2, we all gather around a fire. That's how the Bwiti tradition is always passed, is around a fire orally. So we'll sit around that fire and talk about life, talk about the Bwiti tradition for like about an hour, and just kind of get everybody in a good headspace, you know, for the ceremony. And then everyone takes the medicine at the same time. It's just holy Iboga root bark ground into a powder on a spoon. So it's kind of dry and it's bitter, but you can use water to wash it down, and, you know, you'll get it down. And then we'll talk more. We're going to keep talking about life, keep sharing things from the tradition. We have the Bwiti music playing, you know, which we've recorded live in the village, that was created by the people for healing, you know. So all of those rhythms and those sound waves are all generated just specifically for you, for your healing. And then you'll start to feel the effects of the medicine after like an hour after taking it, or maybe an hour and a half. And that's when we'll lead you to our prepared temple space, which is just kind of nearby to the fire. And each person has their own little mattress that they'll have their ceremony on, spend the night on. We have the traditional Bwiti altar built there with all the elements of ceremony, all of our tools. We have the music playing in the temple all night, which is extremely important to kind of hold that thread for you. It's tuning back into the music is always important. The rhythm is like extremely, extremely complex and sometimes a little bit hard to listen to. But, it's actually kind of defragmenting you and chiseling away. We have this one song that we call the Chiseler because it's just hacking away at that very tough facade that we all have built around our minds and around ourselves. Sometimes as a form of protection, but this is a chance to really let those walls down. So once you hit the mat, we have a little eye cover, that you can put over your eyes. Iboga is not a real open-eyed experience, like a psychedelic trippy experience. It's a very inward journey. If you do open your eyes to stand up or go to the bathroom, like the lights are bright and you feel a little blurry or sensitive, but most of the vision is happening like in the mind's eye within, or in your third eye, or like in your heart space. So as you're laying there, it's different for everyone, and it's different for everyone every time. I've had journeys that have been completely different from other journeys. But what some people experience at first is like a mental detox. So it's kind of like all of those old files you've been storing your whole life, like a cartoon from when you were little, or a commercial, or something someone said to you, or all this stuff that you're just crammed full is just kind of leaving your mind. And it might go by very quickly, like random pictures, random things. And we always tell people, like, just let that first couple of hours, just let that go. That stuff just needs to kind of make some room. So you don't need to overanalyze it or try to hold on to it or worry too much about it. You just kind of need to let it pass by. And then once that starts to settle down a little bit, like I said, it's different for everyone. For me, it's a very strong pressure in my third eye where it's like a magnifying glass on my thoughts. Like, how does my mind work? What kinds of thoughts do I have throughout my day, and how do they affect me? There's negative thought loops that I get in throughout my day. And if I start to focus on them during my journey, they're going to kind of expand in such a way that I can make sense of them and be like, oh my gosh, that is what I'm doing to myself every time I have those thoughts. Like, I'm really holding myself back with those negative thought loops. Or these are the positive things that come up in my mind throughout the day. So I think analyzing your own mind and learning about yourself in that way happens to everyone during Iboga, for sure. And it might present in different ways. Some people see it as more of like a movie screen that pops up and you can see different chapters of your life. There's also a guided aspect to the Iboga journey. So we'll be coming around and walking you through these guided journeys to help you kind of have a productive experience. And I think people really love that because it gives some structure to like a very long night. So those guided journeys are super special. And then, the Iboga lasts all night until the sun rises. And when the sun rises, it kind of changes. It sort of lessens to a degree. And that's when we'll take you back to your room for rest and integration day. But you're still very high on that day. You're definitely still getting a lot of wisdom and insights and downloads. Most people stay mostly in their bed, and hopefully getting some sleep by that following night. So it's kind of quite an arc of that entire night of ceremony, however that is for you, and then that day of integration before then sleeping again. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about these guided portions and how that works.
Yeah, for sure. The guided part's important because we're going to be working on, there's so many different things that we can do and that happens. One of them is a life review. So going back and finding yourself when you're born at 1 year old, at 2 years old, and checking in with you over time and what's going on and having a conversation with yourself over the course of your life and finding yourself at pivotal moments during your life that really changed you. And asking questions so you can understand more, about what happened and why. I mentioned a written exercise earlier. What the written exercise is a list of questions that you have about your life. So it can be anything from like, what is my purpose, to should I move, to what happened when I was 4 that I can't remember, or, what can I do to help myself stop, living in fear, or whatever you want to know about yourself or about your life. And during that guided journey, then we're going to read those questions to you to help you remember them and help you get those answers. So the goal is really to get some concrete answers to questions you have about your life. And of course, you're in the moment. So that's on us to kind of help you remember the next day as well, what went on, and keep that thread for you, Yeah.
Yeah. So how much recall do people have? Since you just mentioned that, because going through this long haul, do people forget things? Do they fade away, or do things really land with people, or is it a mix?
I would say for the most part, it really stays. It's really very clear. It's really very close to your heart, especially the big answers that you've been waiting to know about, that you finally have some clarity on. It's going to be there, for sure. There might be like a lot going on in your mind that next day. And I would say, if anything, the most frustrating part can be the end of rest day when you're just really tired and you're just over it and you want to get some sleep.
Yeah.
That can definitely be challenging for sure, because it's a long time. It's a long time to be in that window. But that longevity is what makes also the results really last so long, because it's really going to like ingrain these things into you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's any generalities that you can make between session 1 and then session 2 that comes later in the week. Do there tend to be main themes that you see, or is it just, it's a brand new experience, it's going to be different?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the person for sure. But I would say in general, session 1 is like that mental detox can sometimes take some time. There can sometimes be some physical detoxing, whether you're purging, sweating, whatever it might be for you. You also don't like have to throw up. Some people purge and some don't, and that's fine. It's just, if there's something that needs to come out, then it'll come out.
Yeah.
And also just like meeting the medicine, kind of getting the hang of it. It's very different than anything else, as all medicines are super different. And maybe releasing some of that natural fear and anxiety we all have when we do something new. Yeah. That way, when you go in the second time, your body's more clear, your mind is more clear. You've already gone through that first layer, and you can really go deeper into the spiritual parts of your journey, really go deeper and release and open up a little bit more, because you're kind of knowing a little bit more about what to expect. And hopefully you're feeling like less afraid, and more relaxed. So I think that second journey often really like drives it all the way home, and you're able to like really go a little bit farther, Yeah.
Yeah. So you've mentioned that often people are coming with depression, anxiety, PTSD, things like that. I assume they're feeling better after all of this, after you've gone through this. What are some of the comments that people make? How are they receiving this work and feeling transformed by it?
Yeah, I mean, definitely people show up in all kinds of states of mind. And I always encourage people. I mean, I'm doing intake and integration, which is really fun because I get to see the before and after full spectrum picture. And people are coming, and I'm like, you don't need to heal before you heal. You can come not okay. You can come at the bottom. That's okay. That's why we're here, So we have that training and trauma-informed training on how to help people that are coming that are really not fine when they're getting on that plane. And sometimes they've weaned down off their antidepressants and gotten off of those in order to come do Iboga, because also you can't be on certain pharmaceutical medications and do Iboga. It's got a lot more that's contraindicated with the use of it. So there's a full medical screening, and we take intake really seriously to make sure that everybody's really safe. By the time they arrive, we know you're good to go because we've done all of our screening already. and kind of set you up for success in that way. And then afterwards, some people have had treatment resistant depression and they've tried everything. They've tried pharmaceuticals, they've tried traditional therapy, they've tried shock therapy, they've tried other plant medicines. And I've seen hundreds of people say that they feel joy, for the first time in their lives, that they're able to feel gratitude for the first time in their lives. They're just a lot of times so excited to go home and see their families because they're just feeling like this overwhelming sense of love. People are so excited to go home a lot of times and just bring that to their families or to their friends or just to their home. And then the beauty with integration is I get to talk to people 6 months later, 1 year later, 2 years later, and see how it's really unfolded. Like the integration arc of Iboga is extremely long. It actually the spirit stays with you and the medicine stays in your bloodstream for 6 months. So you have 6 months to really work on making changes. The neuroplasticity of your brain is really high. This is a great time to form new habits and new patterns in your day-to-day life. And people feel amazing. And I think most of our clients don't go back to pharmaceuticals or back to the way that they felt before,
Yeah. That's great. And that's so nice that you're able to sort of bookend that with doing both the intake and then the integration afterwards. That I think it would be kind of a hard job just to be the intake person. Because then you are getting people with lots of struggles and maybe coming in like really in a dark place, but getting to see them at both ends. I'm sure that's very enlivening for you just within the job.
It is definitely. It definitely is. At first, when we started this and I was doing mostly intake, I'm like, I feel like just the call center for just the world's problems right now. Like this is intense, But yeah, to know that you actually have something to offer that can really help makes it really worth it. Definitely. And I think only in the last maybe 2 years have I really expanded into the integration world and realized how important it is, because it's not a magic pill. It's not like you go home and your life is perfect. Sometimes you go home and you realize you need to get a divorce or you need to quit your job. And that's not easy, So having somebody to talk to that knows what you went through and helps you maintain that thread of like, okay, sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But imagine once you've gotten that divorce or left that job or moved or made those changes, how much better you're going to feel and how much farther you're going to be down the path towards your real truth and your real happiness in making those tough changes, Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a good segue then. Let's go ahead and just jump into the integration side of things. And let's just kind of start with, you said that this is relatively new for you, past couple of years. How'd you get into it? And really specifically with Iboga, what does it really mean for you? And also kind of with the idea that a lot of people want to move into the integration space. They want to be integration coaches. And let's say somebody sets up shop and they're getting clients who have been working with Iboga. What is it that they need to know in order to be able to properly guide people through this integration period? So that's kind of a lot there, but let's start wherever you like about integration.
Yeah. So, I only do Iboga integration because it's all that I really know and can speak for. And it's what I've studied and it's what I know. I also do only Bwiti centered Iboga integration. So it's extremely niche. But, for me, I'm not bringing other types of integrative modalities. Other people do, and that's great. But I'm just using the Bwiti tradition and philosophy itself to help people stay on track. As I said, the goal of these retreats is to reconnect to your soul. So the integration is going to be a lot about maintaining that close connection, keeping, holding hands firmly through the trials that life is going to offer, because it's really not about not having challenges in life anymore, right? It's about how we confront those challenges and how we react to those challenges. So our integration package is you get 2 sessions with me that you can schedule anytime within a year of leaving the retreat. They're usually about an hour long, and it's kind of just going to be like a nice check-in. It's going to be like what we did at the fire when we were talking about Bwiti tradition and their perspective on life and how they see mental illness and how they see different things, and just having that little mini fire talk, a couple of times in your year after leaving. I usually tell people to do the first one like within a month so that we can just keep that thread strong. And then that second call can happen whenever. Maybe they're feeling great. Sometimes people just want to tell me how great they're feeling. And that's really awesome too, just to hear, oh my God, yeah, like this happened and then this happened and then I did this. And I'm like, yes, I love it, But just sticking to the Bwiti tradition. For me, with Iboga, for us, there is no Iboga without Bwiti. They're together. So I think it's important when people use Iboga to have some knowledge of the tradition to help guide people down that same channel, Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you probably have to have your notes available from what actually transpired when this person had their first fire ceremony, what came up in their session, so that you can kind of reference all of that material.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a blessing that I'm with them through the process, so that I know what they did go through and stuff, and we have that common thread. But I'm also not always at ceremony or at retreat because I'm with the kids a lot. So we catch up, we keep in touch. We can do a little debrief at the beginning of the call, and they can clue me in or remind me of any important things, but it's really going to be about having like a little toolbox that you need when things do arise, and finding those simple strategies for yourself that work to help you reroute your thought patterns and keep getting back on the horse. You know what I mean? Iboga and Bwiti is African, so it's all like very simple. There's nothing really complex. There's no super long thing you need to memorize or, any certain thing you need to do. It's very foundational. It's very much about the senses, being present in your day-to-day, and finding ways to keep kind of coming back to yourself, Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So I love the fact that it's very, very specialized, because I think really I'd like to see integration coaches be more like that and less generalized, because if it gets too general, like sometimes you get people who are like, well, I tell people to meditate and do yoga. And it's like, that is like so generic.
Yeah. And is it going to help? I don't know.
Yeah. And is it going to help? Like in my world of 5-MeO DMT, a lot of people, if they're like meditating or doing yoga after a 5-MeO experience, they're going back into a 5-MeO experience that triggers a reactivation. And then they're having anxiety and, so like giving people like just generic advice, it just doesn't really work. And I love to hear that you're really grounding it in that Bwiti tradition, that you've been trained in it. That's how it's facilitated. That's how the integration comes in, so that it's all part of the same framework. And I think that that's much more targeted and hopefully grounded and efficacious for people just to keep coming back to those guidelines. And I love that there's so much emphasis just on what are you doing in your life? What are the choices that you're making? How are you treating yourself? Right? Yeah. Just these very, very grounded elements. And, I've kind of commented on this before, but that there's so much of that sort of missing in the psychedelic world for a lot of people, because it is about the extraordinary and kind of leaving the mundane world behind. And I like to say, look, if it's not helping us be more integrated as a human being, then maybe we're missing the target. And so
for sure.
So I love this emphasis.
Yeah, and like we said, each of the plants has this different role to play, because sometimes we need to see how big the universe is and be humbled by it and really see how small we are within it and understand how much more is out there. But I do think Iboga is coming right now at this point in time for a reason, because people need that grounding, real-time information and direct experience with what it means to love themselves, and that's why it's so helpful for mental illness, because we need some answers, and Iboga's really coming with that vision. So I think it's here right now for a reason, for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting that you phrase it that way, because I can definitely see the validity and the use for that. And for me in my world that I say that 5-MeO DMT is becoming very popular now, in the sense that on the other end of that spectrum, that what it reveals is that we are all fundamentally equal, because as we go into this transcendent state, it's just a state of oneness. And so I like to say that that's kind of the antidote to the divisiveness and divisions that we have, and the dehumanizing we have of others, and the othering that we do, and that my tribe is better than your tribe, and we're right and you're wrong. And that this brings us into a state of, we're all actually one. So can we treat each other from that place? But then there's still the need for, how am I being in my life with my others, with my kids, with my partners? Where am I directing my attention? So, it's all part of this nice package. And it doesn't sound like your retreat does it, but I do know that a lot of retreats that offer Iboga and Ibogaine also top it off with a 5-MeO experience afterwards, to kind of like, after you've gone through your personal stuff, here's the transpersonal. So I can see them as kind of working at both ends of that spectrum in a nice way.
Yeah. And I think kind of another way to look at it from the Bwiti perspective is like, okay, within the Bwiti tribe, there's no hierarchy. Everyone has their own say, and it is equal in that type of way. And it's like, we're rerouting the thinking of what it means to put ourselves first, because in the Western culture, being selfish is like such a nasty word. Like no one wants to be selfish, right? But in the tribe, okay, today we all need to go hunting, and we need every member of the tribe to show up having taken great care of themselves and gotten a good night's sleep and eaten their breakfast and stuff, so that like we can crush it as a group, And if you show up as the weak link, it's not really about you. It actually is about the whole. It is about everybody. We need you to put yourself first, so that we can all be in unison and like survive, So I think that does bring that mentality of like, okay, you are putting yourself first and doing these things for you in order to make the world a better place, in order to benefit the whole and make change in the world around you,
Yeah. There is such a healthy way of being selfish and self-centered. That there really, really is. And I think that's part of the dichotomy that gets lost in the West, is that we've promoted these ideals of being selfless, like keep giving everything away and serving others. And then if you are quote unquote selfish, it's a very isolated sense of selfishness, because it's not, I'm going to take care of myself so I can fit within the tribe, I can fit within the group, I can contribute. But then it turns into, how can I dominate and just get what I want? But it's coming from a very unhealthy place. So we need healthy selfishness, healthy self-care.
Yes. Yeah. There's kind of a fine line there, but I think when it's rooted in that real gratitude for the fact that we have this gift of life, it kind of puts it right in its right place, Yeah.
So what inspired the transition from Costa Rica to Portugal? And what were things like in Costa Rica? I was just in Costa Rica recently. I go there for the birds.
Nice.
Was there with my family. Oh my God. The birding is so awesome there. It's so great. Was in the Arenal region, which I I loved that. So lush in the jungle. And then spent some time in Tamarindo and Guanacaste. But that was it was really dry, really, really dry, and forest fires. Totally different. But if you could just tell us a little bit about Costa Rica, because it's kind of a hotbed these days for psychedelic medicine work. And then the transition to Portugal, I'm just kind of curious about how that came about, and how are things in Portugal?
For sure. Yeah. Costa Rica, as you know, is amazing. We actually were in Guanacaste. We were in Playa Cotal, which is like about an hour north of Tamarindo. It can be very hot and dry in the dry season, but the rainy season's like lush and gorgeous. So in that dry season, you definitely need to just stay in the ocean mostly. And I loved it there. We all loved it there. My daughter was born there. We hosted so many beautiful retreats there. I think the progression to Portugal was kind of natural. I think we kind of did it. We spent like 5 years there, and we went to the beach like 1 million times, and it was time for something different. And I also think as my children have gotten older, the opportunities for higher education here in Portugal are a little bit more varied. They can easily travel Europe and have access to more in that way. So Portugal is stunning. It's absolutely amazing. It really reminds me of California. You know, we originally are from Humboldt County, kind of near you. I think you're in
Yeah.
Ashland, correct?
Yeah.
So we're from your neck of the woods. Portugal's really the California of Europe. It's the very westernmost point in all of Europe. And I think it also comes with that like consciousness edge. Like people here are kind of thinking in new ways. They're repatterning things. There's a lot of healing retreats happening, you know, here in Portugal, and especially here where we are in Sintra. It's a very sacred place. And we love it. It's really welcomed us. You know, legally, Iboga is not a scheduled illegal drug here. So that's something that's definitely a reason why we came.
Yeah.
And just having a different whole clientele. I mean, now it's mostly Europeans. We have so many people visiting us from Switzerland, Iceland, Germany, Russia. So really a whole nother sector of the world population, whereas in Costa Rica, it was a lot of like Americans or people coming from South America. So it's been really cool just seeing what the this side of the world is kind of dealing with and where they're at, you know. Yeah.
And with that diversity of clientele, I'm just curious, do you see any shifts or any changes that might be happening there in terms of the demographics of who's coming? It's something that I've commented on a lot is that these days we do tend to see a lot of people who are kind of brand new to the idea of working with psychedelic medicines, whereas, you know, a decade ago, you weren't getting people who are saying, well, you know, I read Michael Pollan's book and I saw the show on Netflix and I thought, I want to try that. So I'm curious that not only you're getting a different clientele being located in a different geographic region, but do you see any shifts there in terms of who's showing up to do this kind of work?
Yeah, Iboga's always such a wild card. You never know who's going to come. And like the age range is huge. Like our youngest client ever was 16. And our oldest client ever was, I think, 76. So super big age range. I think people in Europe are very open-minded. A lot of them maintain a little bit of closer connections with their ancestry, maybe than us as Americans have, because they're in Europe where their great-great-great-great-grandfathers have, you know, lived or have had this legacy or have gone through things. I think in America, we're a little bit removed from our history in a certain way, which I think has pros and cons. You know, it's beautiful because we can reinvent ourselves and really be free to like find out who we are in real time. But also we kind of are without a lot of guidance or support or like learning from the past that I think happens in Europe.